There is no most valuable Viking. There are only 40 most valuable Vikings. 40 for 60, put it that way. I just can't accept this. Thank you.
For the Minnesota Vikings, the 1969 season ended in January just as it had begun in September, with an unexpected defeat. It all began with quarterback Gary Quazzo and receiver John Henderson, who combined perfectly for the season's first touchdown. Quazzo then launched a bomb to Gene Washington for a comfortable halftime lead over the New York Giants. But new coach Alex Webster and 63,000 Yankee Stadium fans ignited the Giants, and a sure victory slipped through the Vikings' grasp, 24-23. Then came the home opener. For 1 year, Joe Kapp had thought about the Baltimore Colts. His thoughts became reality when an early touchdown pass flew straight to Dave Osborne. Moments later, a long pass to Gene Washington covered 83 yards and a second touchdown. A third touchdown pass sailed to wide receiver Bob Grimm, number 27. Touchdown pass number 4 went to tight end Kent Tramer. Ignoring a fractured left wrist, Kapp floated touchdown number 5 to Gene Washington. Kapp drilled a short pass to tight end John Beasley for touchdown number 6. A Kapp pass to Jim Lindsey became number 7, which tied the NFL record for touchdown passes and heralded the start of something big for Joe Kapp and the Vikings. The University of Minnesota's Memorial Stadium was the site for game number 3. The Pack was back. But in the first pro game ever played in a Big Ten stadium, Minnesota's Purple Gang decked Green Bay's Bart Starr 8 times and missed a shutout by only 5 seconds. In Game 4, the Vikings were rambunctious guests at the home opener of the Chicago Bears. The Vikings not only defeated the Bears by 31 points, but earned the first shutout in their 9-year history. True to the code of 40 men for 60 minutes, the biggest play occurred when number 57, former Bear Mike Riley, blocked a punt and recovered it for a touchdown. Game 5 was against the Cardinals in St. Louis. Joe Kapp threw 1 touchdown pass to John Beasley and 2 to John Henderson, and for the first time in their history, the Vikings had won 4 consecutive games. Back home against Detroit, Joe Kapp bombed the Lions for a 21-point halftime lead. Cornerback Ursel McBee, number 46, intercepted 3 passes, and the Vikings rolled on to their 5th straight victory. Next, it was the Bears' turn again. This time, Bobby Douglas wore the bullseye. The Purple Gang got to him 9 times for almost 80 yards in losses. On offense, magnificent blocking allowed Joe Kapp to throw 2 more touchdown passes. The Vikings ended the first half of the season in style when number 26, Clint Jones, broke free for an 80-yard touchdown, the longest NFL run in 5 years. The Vikings were riding high with 6 straight wins, 2 of them over their old nemesis, the Bears, and a national audience was beginning to understand the meaning of 40 for 60. The second half of the season began with the red-hot Cleveland Browns, led by quarterback Bill Nelson. The Browns were quickly cooled. The front 4 pressured Nelson into 4 interceptions, 3 by number 20, Bobby Bryant. The Viking offense scored the first 9 times it had the ball. Joe Kapp survived Cleveland's pressure and completed 3 more touchdown passes to Gene Washington as the Vikings rolled up their 7th straight victory, 51-3. Next came the crucial rematch with the Packers in Milwaukee on a day when neither team's offense could score a touchdown. In a savage defensive battle, the Vikings gained their 8th consecutive victory. Green Bay's last chance was thwarted by Bobby Bryant's interception inside the Viking 10. The Pittsburgh Steelers were next. Quarterback Gary Quazzo, for the 2nd straight week, played a major part in proving that 40 for 60 was more than just a slogan. The game's biggest play was an example of what happens when a team is winning. Number 87 is John Beasley. 26 is Clint Jones. And 52 is the number of points the Vikings scored as they rolled to their 9th straight victory. Then came Thanksgiving Day in Detroit. The Lions had won 4 straight and were prepared to play their biggest game in 7 years. At stake was the Central Division title. The Vikings forged an early lead and then teed off on quarterback Greg Landry. The final crushing blow occurred when Alan Page tipped a pass and Jim Marshall intercepted. Page, attempting to block for Marshall, wound up scoring himself as the Vikings swept their 10th straight and their 2nd straight Central Division championship. Next came the undefeated Rams in their glamorous Hollywood setting. Roman Gabriel, the NFL's most valuable player, had led the Rams to 11 straight wins. But it was the Vikings who controlled the game. And it was the Vikings who left the Coliseum with 11 straight wins. Back home the following week, the biggest story of the day was an 11-year-old boy whose hot air balloon dumped him in the Minnesota River 3 miles away. It was a tough act to follow, but the Vikings and 49ers managed quite a show of their own. Fred Cox scored all the points in the first half, 3. In the second half, the visibility improved. A long pass to Gene Washington finally made the difference as the Vikings mushed to their 12th straight victory. the longest one-season winning streak in 35 years, and once again, Joe Kapp had played Santa Claus for the Vikings. The final game of the regular season was in Atlanta, which some people consider part of the sunny South. The Falcons won 10-3. In just 3 years, Coach of the Year Bud Grant had led his team from the bottom to the top. The Vikings scored the most points in all of pro football. They gave up the fewest ever in a 14-game season. Such success begins with defense, and defense begins with the front four. Number 81, Carl Eller. Number 77, Gary Larson. Number 88, Alan Page. And number 70, Jim Marshall. All four played in the Pro Bowl. Right end Jim Marshall is perhaps the quickest striking force in football. Tackles Gary Larson and Alan Page apply the inside pressure. To All-Pro Carl Eller, the philosophy of defensive football is simple.
Defensive ball players take pride in knowing that they're rough and that they're tough and that they're mean, and that you really have to just hit and smack and sock and tear, and whatever happens, it's going to be all for one and one for all.
The Vikings secondary also punishes people with devastating hitters like Dale Hackbart, number 49. The Vikings led the NFL in interceptions with 30. Everyone helped. Carl Kosulke, number 29. Ursel McBee, number 46. Ed Shirachman, number 45. Paul Krause, number 22. And the new star, Bobby Bryant, number 20. In spite of his rail-thin 168 pounds, Bryant always seemed to be making the big play for the Vikings. Seven interceptions were grabbed by the linebackers, but their usual style was less subtle, like the blitz. Number 58 is right linebacker Wally Hilgenberg. Number 60 is left linebacker Roy Winston. Number 59 is middle linebacker Lonnie Warwick. Place kicker Fred Cox scored 121 points, the most points ever scored in the NFL by place kicking. Another special team member, number 40, Charlie West, accounted for almost 500 yards in kick returns. The team's greatest improvement was in the high-scoring offense, especially the passing game. It wasn't fancy, but it was extremely effective. John Beasley, number 87, was the tough-catching tight end. Number 80, John Henderson, was a graceful and effective wide receiver. Number 84, willowy Gene Washington, is rapidly approaching his goal to be the best receiver in football. He can catch the ball anywhere on the field, but most often he seems to catch it behind the defense. Offensive tackles Alderman, Davis, and Yerry. Guards Sunday, Valone, and White. And center Tingelhoff are among the best at opening holes for runners like number 26, Clint Jones. Number 32, second-year back Oscar Reed, averaged nearly 5 yards per carry. Number 30, Bill Brown, is one of the best receivers in football. But what Bill Brown is best known for is his roughhouse style of running. Dave Osborne, number 41, is also an excellent receiver. But what he is best known for is his vast repertoire of second effort moves. Among the 40 most valuable Vikings is quarterback Joe Kapp. But somehow he is something more. December 27th, Metropolitan Stadium. The Vikings versus the Rams in the Western Conference Championship game. At halftime, the Rams led 17-7. It was no longer 40 for 60. It was now 47,900 for 30.
Hurts a little, huh? Lester hurts a little, huh? All right, let's go. Come on, get it. 3:18. Hunt. 275! Hut! Hut! Make it go! Make it go! We got it! Come on, Joe! Come on, Joe! Check! 275! Hut! Hut! You got it! You got it!
Seconds to play, and the Rams were driving. Then came the play of a lifetime for Alan Page, number 88.
Hey, you did it close today, Al. You and Moose, way to go.
Hey, look here.
And then suddenly it was over. For the Vikings and their fire-breathing quarterback, there was to be one more magic day against Cleveland in the NFL Championship game. After the first 7 minutes, the Vikings were being acclaimed as the new NFL champions. It was a magic day that belonged in great part to a unique quarterback. It was a magic day that belonged, most of all, to 40 men competing as one. On January 13, 1974, in Houston's Rice Stadium, it was the destiny of the NFC champion Minnesota Vikings to meet one of pro football's greatest teams ever on one of its greatest days. Super Bowl VIII was a day of ultimate triumph for the Miami Dolphins and a day of aching frustration for the Minnesota Vikings. But even in defeat, there remain the warm memories of a spectacular season. A season of 19 victories and just 3 defeats. Most of all, a season in which the Minnesota Vikings proved that they were winners as they swept to the championship of the National Football Conference. For Coach Bud Grant and the Minnesota Vikings, the season opened on September 16th in Metropolitan Stadium. And following an undefeated preseason, the Vikings were ready for the always powerful Oakland Raiders. John Gilliam gave the Vikings an early 10-point lead, but Fran Tarkenton found himself trailing 16-10 late in the third quarter. Tight end Stu Voigt rolled the Vikings into scoring position, and one play later, Fran Tarkenton hit rookie Chuck Foreman, who twisted his way to the go-ahead touchdown. Old reliable Bill Brown added the clincher, and Minnesota wrapped up an impressive team victory 24-16. Week 2 found the Vikings in Chicago for the first of 3 consecutive Central Division battles. Against the Bears, Chuck Foreman literally burst to the front in the Rookie of the Year race, as time after time he found his way into the Chicago secondary. Chuck Foreman ran for 116 yards. Fran Tarkenton passed for the game's only touchdown. And Fred Cox kicked 5 field goals as the Vikings again came from behind to win 22-13. The returning heroes of the offense were welcomed home the following week. But against the defending Central champion Green Bay Packers, a different kind of game was in store. As one Packer said afterward, they just poured in on us. In a game decided by first downs instead of by touchdowns, the Vikings out-hit and out-kicked the Packers 11-3. Week 4 found the Vikings in Detroit, where 2 early errors by the Lions' special team set up 2 touchdowns in the first 4.5 minutes, both on scoring passes to Ed Marinaro. The Vikings won their 4th straight, 23-9. Next, the Vikings put their undefeated streak on the line against the San Francisco 49ers, a team they had not beaten in their last 3 tries. John Gilliam again provided an early lead, but Steve Spurrier completed 31 passes, the most ever against the Vikings. And the outcome was in doubt until 2 crucial fourth-quarter interceptions by Paul Krause saved a 5th straight victory, 17-13. Back home for a 4-game stand, the Vikings next faced their old friend Roman Gabriel, now the leader of the surprisingly tough Philadelphia Eagles. Fran Tarkenton had the perfect antidote for any kind of trouble. Number 42, John Gilliam. Fran Tarkenton connected on 16 of 21 passes, including 6 to John Gilliam, who totaled 160 yards and scored 2 touchdowns. as the Vikings offense hit its stride and outscored the Eagles 28-21 for a 6th consecutive win. Then came Week 7, and a battle of the Titans as the NFL's only unbeaten teams squared off against each other. The Los Angeles Rams had the league's top-rated offense, but the only touchdown of the game came on a short pass to Chuck Foreman. The rest was up to the Vikings defense, and they were magnificent. Leading 10-9 with time running out, Jeff Seaman blitzed John Hadel out of field goal range. And with their 7th consecutive win, the Vikings had equaled their victory total of the previous season and were the only undefeated team in the league. The always formidable Cleveland Browns were next for the Vikings, but no matter what the Browns tried, there was a Viking ready to turn the play around for Minnesota. The Viking defense held Cleveland to just 4 first downs and no touchdowns, while the offense provided 23 first downs and some of the year's most spectacular plays by Fran Tarkenton and Stu Voigt. Cleveland became Minnesota's 8th consecutive victim, 26-3. And the Vikings rolled on to Week 9 in the rematch with the revitalized and ravenously hungry Detroit Lions. Detroit scored first, but once again, weird special team play hurt the Lions and helped the Vikings. Wally Hilgenberg's touchdown put the Vikings ahead, and then the clock rolled back to the 60s as Fran Tarkenton handed off to Dave Osborne 14 times for 79 yards, and to the old bowling ball Bill Brown 18 times for 103 yards. Fran Tarkenton enjoyed another typically efficient afternoon as he hit on 11 of 15 passes, including another touchdown to John Gilliam. The offensive line devastated the Detroit defense, opening the way to the Vikings' 9th straight victory of the season and their 12th straight over the Lions, 28-7. Not only were the Vikings the lone undefeated team in the NFL, but after just 9 weeks, they had already clinched the Central Division title for the 5th time in the past 6 years. In Minnesota, he was Bob Lee. In Atlanta, he was General Robert M. Lee, and he was looking for an end to the Vikings' unbeaten streak and for a 6th consecutive win for the Falcons. The Vikings' winning streak finally ended in Atlanta, 20-14. The following week was the last home game of the regular season. Governor Anderson officially proclaimed it Carl Kasulke Day. The former Minnesota strong safety had been paralyzed from the chest down in a motorcycle crash the day before training camp opened, and now he was making his first public appearance since the accident. As John Gilliam said, "I don't think we can ever do enough to repay him for what he's done for us." In the game itself, the Vikings rolled up 31 points against the Bears, of which 12 were scored by John Gilliam, who later presented the game ball to Carl Kasulke. The regular season ended with 12 wins and 2 losses, a record which tied for the best in the NFL. And one of the reasons for that record was Bud Grant's outstanding offensive line, anchored at left tackle by Captain Grady Alderman. At left guard was Ed White, the world's arm wrestling champion. At center was Mick Tingelhoff, a 7-time All-Pro who made himself one of the game's most celebrated free agents. Sharing right guard were John Henry Ward until he broke his leg, and number 64, veteran Milt Sunday. Ron Yeri was again an All-Pro and a major contributor to the health and welfare of Francis Asbury Tarkenton, who led the entire NFL in passing percentage and in fewest interceptions while directing a masterfully coordinated Minnesota offense. An offense which attacked the opposition with more than 2,000 yards in both rushing and passing. Among Tarkenton's receivers were 6 who averaged at least 1 catch per game. 3 of these were running backs. Oscar Reed, the multi-talented rookie Chuck Foreman, and the second-year man from the Ivy League, Ed Marinaro. At one wide receiver spot, Tarkenton could call on the experience of 14 pro seasons and former Green Bay Packer Carroll Dale. From the tight end position, Tarkenton could rely on Stu Voigt to make the key catch, no matter how heavy the traffic. When it came time for the big play, week after week, Tarkenton looked for and found Minnesota's Mr. Smooth, John Gilliam. John Gilliam scored 9 touchdowns and caught 42 passes for more than 900 yards as he led his team in receiving for the 5th straight year. And no matter who was at quarterback, Fran Tarkenton or his backup Bob Berry, the man to look for was John Gilliam. The running game achieved new heights in '73. Fran Tarkenton ran his career rushing total past 3,300 yards with a lifetime average of 6 yards a try. With Tarkenton in the backfield most of the year was the man they called the Seed, Oscar Reed, with a solid 4 yards per carry. And then there was number 44, Walter Eugene Chuck Foreman, the Vikings' first authentic breakaway back since the early years of Tommy Mason. Despite several nagging injuries, Foreman handled the ball more than 200 times for a total of almost 1,200 yards in total offense and was consensus NFC Rookie of the Year for 1973.
All right, let's huddle up. Come on, guys, let's get it going. All right, make sure you're onside. Don't let anybody offside. First man down there. We're riding a wild horse. Let's go now. I'll beat you to the tackle, Nate.
At age 35, Bill Brown was not just the oldest running back in the league, but as captain of the Vikings special teams, he was a rare blend of experience and enthusiasm. As Brown said, that retirement talk just makes me work that much harder. Bill Brown was an inspiration to the rest of the Vikings' excellent special teams, of which the more visible members were punter Mike Eischeid, an expert at moving the ball around for favorable field position, and Fred Cox, who passed the 1,000-point mark and became number 4 on the NFL's all-time scoring list. The Minnesota defense returned to good health in '73 as they gave up the fewest points in the NFC and the fewest touchdowns in the entire league, an average of less than 1 a game. The defensive secondary forced its share of turnovers. The most spectacular was by Terry Brown against the New York Giants. Terry Brown is an example of the quality depth which waits behind men like free safety Paul Krause, number 22, the NFL's leading active interceptor and third on the all-time list. And men like strong safety Jeff Wright, number 23, the third-year man from the University of Minnesota. And left cornerback Nate Wright, number 43, the other half of the Minnesota Vikings' own particular version of the Wright brothers. At right cornerback was Bobby Bryant, 170 pounds of true grit, and the NFC's leading interceptor for the year with 7. The Viking linebackers combined youth with savvy. On the outside, there was experience in 10-year veteran Wally Hilgenberg on one side and 12-year veteran Roy Winston on the other. In the middle, there was youth and a developing star in second-year man Jeff Seaman, number 50. At defensive tackle were perennial All-Pro Alan Page and strongman Gary Larson. At end were All-Pro Carl Eller and Captain Jim Marshall, the Iron Man. The fifth man was TV star Bob Lertzema. The Viking front four has been an inseparable unit since 1967, when Alan Page arrived from Notre Dame. All nicknames aside, the Viking front four is quite simply one of the best in pro football history and the foundation for one of the best defensive teams ever to play the game. December 22nd, 1973, the opening game of the NFL playoffs. Most of the Vikings had been there before, but two who had not been there were Fran Tarkenton and John Gilliam. In their first crucial game in 6 weeks, the Vikings were tight at the start, and they trailed the Washington Redskins 7-3 at the half. The man who finally got things going was Oscar Reed, who accounted for 171 yards running and receiving. As Reed said after the game, since early in the season, they've been keying on Chuck Foreman. I'm not the world's greatest pass catcher or runner, but given a little room, I'll use what I've got. Twice, Billy Kilmer put the Redskins ahead, but then Carl Eller told John Gilliam to shake it off, and with one kick, he blasted a blackboard to the floor. And in the second half, the Vikings twice came from behind to take the lead. While Metropolitan Stadium quivered with joy in the twilight, Fran Tarkenton performed still another of his miracles. Within 1 minute of the fourth quarter, Tarkenton found Gilliam twice for touchdowns. The Vikings won 27-20, and it was on to Dallas to play for the championship of the National Football Conference. Irving, Texas was not exactly friendly territory for Fran Tarkenton and the Vikings. But in his first championship game in 13 years of pro football, Tarkenton played the best game of his best season. His play selection and field generalship kept the Dallas Doomsday defense off balance throughout the game and enabled the Vikings to control the ball for almost the entire first half, which ended with Minnesota leading 10-0. In the third quarter, Mike Eischeid boomed a punt 58 yards from his own end zone. But a Dallas rookie named Golden Richards almost inspired the Cowboys to another championship. As a nation of pro football fans looked on, Fran Tarkenton showed the winner's touch. Just 3 plays after Dallas had scored, Tarkenton retreated and threw the ball just as far as he could. As he had done so often, John Gilliam scored the touchdown which broke the game open. Again, it was up to the defense, and the Purple Gang never looked better. The Cowboys tried everything in their playbook, but the Vikings just kept hammering the ball loose. Bobby Bryant's touchdown finished an almost perfect day for Minnesota. The Vikings won 27-10, not just because of Bryant and Gilliam and Tarkenton, but because 40 men had played a team sport about as well as it can be played. And that is how the Minnesota Vikings became champions of the National Football Conference. On January 12, 1975, in Tulane Stadium, New Orleans, the Minnesota Vikings took part in their second consecutive Super Bowl game and their third in the past 6 years. As champions of the National Football Conference, they were prepared in every way possible. But as Coach Bud Grant has often said, one thing you can't coach is the bounce of the football. And against the AFC champion Pittsburgh Steelers, every score was the direct result of an eccentric bounce of the football. Late in the fourth quarter, an apparent Minnesota fumble recovery was ruled after the whistle, and the Pittsburgh Steelers then went on to score the championship-clinching touchdown. A touchdown almost too painful to endure, especially for the Vikings who had been there the longest. But to a man, each member of the team had every right to be proud of himself and an extraordinarily successful championship season. The Vikings' 1974 season opened in Green Bay, where Coach Bud Grant saw his team demonstrate early strength in every area. The offense was keyed by 1973 Rookie of the Year Chuck Foreman, who began his season with 3 touchdowns against the arch-rival Packers. The defense was up to its old tricks with 4 turnovers, 2 of them interceptions by cornerback Nate Wright. And the special teams came up with big plays too, as the Vikings got off to a rousing start by beating Green Bay for the 11th time in 13 tries, 32-17. The second week found the Vikings in Detroit, where the Minnesota defense played what Bud Grant called one of the best games it has ever played. While the defense was holding the Lions to just 9 first downs and no touchdowns, Fran Tarkenton and the offense did all the rest that was needed to produce a 7-6 victory, Minnesota's 13th straight over Detroit. The season's third week brought the Vikings home opener and their 3rd consecutive Central Division opponent, the Chicago Bears. Again, Fran Tarkenton and the offense did just enough. And this time, the key man was tight end Stu Voigt. The Vikings won 11-7, and Fran Tarkenton passed another milestone in his amazing career. Week 4 brought a rematch of the previous year's NFC Championship game in Dallas, and the Cowboys took an early lead with the first touchdown pass of the season against the Vikings. Fran Tarkenton fought fire with fire, and once again the man of the hour was number 44, Chuck Foreman. As was becoming his custom, Chuck Foreman led the Vikings in both rushing and receiving, and against Dallas accounted for more than 200 yards and 2 more touchdowns. It was almost not enough. But let's hear how Joe McConnell of the Vikings radio network reported it.
Well, here we go. Krause will hold from the 17, a 27-yard attempt. The ball is down, the kick is up. It is good! Oh, a late signal! A late signal. Apparently it was very close to the right upright. Wow.
Fred Cox's field goal with just 1 second left gave the Vikings their 4th straight victory. And then it was back home for one of the greatest offensive shows of the NFL season. Against the Houston Oilers, Chuck Foreman scored 2 more touchdowns. Fran Tarkenton hit on 18 of 24 passes and 3 touchdowns, including one of 80 yards to John Gilliam, as the Vikings rolled up more than 500 yards of total offense and the most points of the entire NFL season. Minnesota crushed Houston 51-10, and after 5 straight victories, it looked as though the division title might be wrapped up even before Viking weather arrived. And who wouldn't be welcome after you've beaten them 13 straight times? In the first meeting, Chuck Foreman had scored the game's only touchdown. And now, in the rematch, Foreman scored 2 more touchdowns to bring his league-leading total to 10 in the first 6 games. This time, the frustrated Lions came roaring back and defeated the Vikings for the first time in 14 tries, 20-16. Next up were the surprising New England Patriots, who, like the Vikings, were 5-1 and just coming off their first loss of the season. Jim Plunkett gunned the Patriots to a 10-0 halftime lead. Fran Tarkenton brought the Vikings back with 2 fourth-quarter touchdowns and a 14-10 lead, which held up until the game's final seconds. After 2 straight defeats, it was on to Chicago for the rematch with the Bears. Fran Tarkenton threw for 2 touchdowns despite rain and the worst wind conditions he had seen in 6 or 7 seasons. The defense came up with another great game and earned a well-deserved shutout as the Vikings rolled past the Bears for the 10th time in their last 12 tries, 17-0. Week 9 found the Vikings in St. Louis for a Monday night encounter with the league's hottest team, the Cardinals, and Jim Hart, the NFC's hottest passer. St. Louis led at the half 17-14, but 3 turnovers set up the Minnesota ground game, and that was the difference between the 2 highest scoring teams in the conference. The top rushing quarterback in pro football history delivered the clinching touchdown in a 28-24 victory. And after 9 weeks, the Vikings led the Central Division by 3 full games. But as Bud Grant warned, it was still no time to relax. In the rematch with Green Bay, John Hadel was a new threat for the Packers. But the game's first touchdown came on a fourth-quarter Fran Tarkenton to Chuck Foreman touchdown pass. With just 3.5 minutes to play, John Hadel beat a Viking blitz, and MacArthur Lane delivered the crushing blow for the Packers. Pro football has no fiercer rivalry than that between Green Bay and Minnesota, whose series was now dead even with 14 victories apiece. The next week in Los Angeles, the NFL's largest crowd in 15 years saw the Vikings go for their 6th straight over the defense-minded Rams. The leader in both rushing and receiving was again Chuck Foreman, who scored his 15th touchdown in the season's 11th game. But it all ended with James Harris completing 10 straight passes, and the Vikings lost their 4th in 6 games, 20-17. For Bud Grant's Vikings, it was time for the final push, from the most specialized of the special team members through the entire 47-man roster. All season long, the kicks of Fred Cox and Mike Eischeid were covered by a band of dedicated zealots whose goal was all-out team football, with little or no regard for personal safety. For years, the Vikings have been known for their tenacious defense. In 1974, they may have given up some yards between the goal lines, but they also permitted only 21 touchdowns, the fewest in the entire NFL. Minnesota's defense is a big play defense, and big plays begin with pressure from the front 4, always a Viking strong point. Former guard and linebacker Doug Sutherland gave added strength to the defensive line, while young hustlers like Dave Boone, number 71, joined in with the old pros. Veterans like benchwarmer Bob Lertzema, number 75, and the Minnesota strongman Gary Larson, number 77. The consecutive game streak by right defensive end Jim Marshall, number 70, is the longest ever for a defensive player. At left end, Carl Eller was a Pro Bowl participant for the 6th time, as was right tackle Alan Page, number 88, the Vikings' king of quickness. The Vikings allowed only 8 touchdown passes, the fewest in the league, and pressure from the line benefited backs like free safety Paul Krause, whose 64 lifetime interceptions ranked 3rd on the all-time list, and rookie cornerback Jackie Wallace, number 25, strong safety Terry Brown, number 24, versatile Jeff Wright, number 23, and the team leader with 6 interceptions, Nate Wright, number 43. But a good defensive back is not just a ball hawk. He's at least equal parts desire, along with the ability to hit. The men in the middle are the linebackers, and number 59, rookie Matt Blair, played like a future star on the outside. Amos Martin, number 55, came up with 3 interceptions, but the outside was patrolled primarily by Wally Hilgenberg, number 58, and Roy Winston, number 60, while the middle was the exclusive domain of Jeff Seaman, number 50. All departments of the Minnesota defense worked together like the components in an intricate machine, and despite key injuries, the Vikings once again played championship-style defense. While the defense allowed the fewest touchdowns, the offense scored the most in the NFC. Fran Tarkenton led the conference in passing yardage, thanks in good part to his protectors, Ron Yeary, Charles Goodrum, Grady Alderman, Ed White, Andy Maurer, Milt Sunday, and Mick Tinglehawk. Number 83, Stu Voigt, was among the most reliable receivers with 32 catches and 5 touchdowns, while deep threat John Gilliam made the Pro Bowl for the 3rd time. At the other wide receiver spot was unheralded second-year man Jim Lash, whose go-all-out style made him an instant favorite. At running back, the quick feet of Oscar Reed gave way to the old pro savvy of Dave Osborne, who rolled up more than 700 yards running and receiving, and opened the way for the fantastic season of number 44, Chuck Foreman. 199 carries for 777 yards, a club record 53 receptions for 586 more yards, a league-leading 15 touchdowns. Chuck Foreman, halfback, fullback, wingback, flanker back, and one of the more skillful all-around offensive players in the game. With 3 games to go in the regular season, the Minnesota Vikings got together and decided to win all the rest. Against the New Orleans Saints in Week 12, Fran Tarkenton and his receivers put on quite a show. 20 completions and 29 tries for more than 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Tight end Stu Voigt caught 7 passes, and the wide receivers Jim Lash and John Gilliam each accounted for more than 100 yards, as the Vikings rolled over the Saints 29-9 and once again locked up the championship of the NFC's Central Division. With the division title clinched, Bud Grant chose number 17, Bob Berry, to start against his former teammates, the Atlanta Falcons. 10-year veteran Dave Osborne caught and ran for 135 yards and 2 touchdowns as the Vikings won 23-10. In the season's final week in Kansas City, Bob Berry hit on 11 of 12 passes, including 2 touchdowns, one of them to number 49, Ed Marinaro. Fran Tarkenton also passed for 2 scores, both to rookie wide receiver Sam McCullum, as the Vikings bombed the Chiefs 35-15. And finally, it was time for the playoffs. The first round of the NFC playoffs, the Central champion Vikings against the Eastern champion St. Louis Cardinals. Time, the score was tied at 7, but in the second half, the Purple Marauders took over the game. Within a 60-second span of the third quarter, the Viking defense turned the game in Minnesota's favor. An interception by Jeff Wright set up a field goal, and then on the next series, what looked at first like a simple loss of yardage for the Cardinals turned into the game breaker for Nate Wright and the Vikings. It was then just a matter of Fran Tarkenton and the offense putting on the frosting. For Bud Grant and the Vikings, the difference between 4 days before Christmas and 4 days after Christmas was the difference between a divisional playoff and a conference championship. Against the Los Angeles Rams in the NFC Championship game, Fran Tarkenton and the Vikings drew first blood with a touchdown pass to Jim Lash. Minnesota led 7-3 at the half. But in the second half, some strange things happened. Jackson was on his way to a touchdown when number 23, Jeff Wright, shoved him out, just inches short of the Minnesota goal line. One of the year's most important plays occurred when Alan Page spotted movement on the left side of the Ram offensive line. The crucial offsides penalty against the Rams forced James Harris into a passing situation on third down, and Jackie Wallace managed to deflect the ball to Wally Hilgenberg. Instead of the Rams going ahead 10-7, the Vikings took the ball and started back the other way. When Dave Osborne culminated the drive by going up and over, the Minnesota lead became 14-3, and it was then just a matter of time for the Vikings. There are many reasons why the 1974 Minnesota Vikings became one of the very few teams ever to successfully defend a conference championship. And those many reasons will live on in the minds and memories of the pro football faithful.
This is Joe McConnell reporting to you from Pasadena, California, the Rose Bowl, and this year the site of Super Bowl 11. For the third time now in the last 4 years, the Minnesota Vikings have been to the Super Bowl. It's a ball.
Super Sunday, a day for champions. Another year, another title for the Minnesota Vikings. Pro football fans in Minnesota have grown accustomed to the rhapsody of easy winning. The Vikings have won the Central Division Championship 8 out of the last 9 years, and the race usually isn't close. The result of a game in Metropolitan Stadium is completely predictable. The Vikings always win, and the fans love the monotony. It's like a movie buff watching Casablanca for the 100th time. Play it again, Vikes. The Vikings are champions not because they tear their opponents apart or bulldoze them into submission, but because they're a team that year after year, Sunday after Sunday, does whatever is necessary to win. The Vikings are like a rubber raft. Every time someone pushes them down in one spot, they bob up in another. Stop the run, and they'll win with the pass. prevent the pass, and they'll win with the run. If the offense can't score, the special teams will. The Vikings win because of the big things, but also because of the little things. Last season, blocked extra points gave Minnesota 1-point victories over Chicago and Detroit. And a blocked field goal saved a 10-10 tie with Los Angeles. In all, the Vikings batted down 15 kicks in 1976. So the Viking mystique can only be explained in bits and pieces. There is no one thing. There never is. One large piece, however, is head coach Bud Grant, known to the sporting world as the Great Stone Face. But to those who have played for him, he is no mystery.
I guess of all the coaches I've been associated with, Bud is the easiest to like because he treats the players with the utmost fairness, and that's all a player can ask for. You don't have to be liked, but they certainly have to be treated fairly, and Bud certainly does that. He also is the best coach I've ever seen at evaluating what his personnel can do. He never asks them to do more than he thinks they're capable of doing. He's been accused of not having emotional teams, and I think there's a reason for that. Emotion is great if you win a game, but where do you go if you're all sky high and piped up and you happen to lose? It's difficult to come back from one of those kinds of efforts. Bud would rather see his team reach a particular level of competence, something that he knows he can count on week in and week out, and from there he can build and do the things that he has to do to win a game. He's not nearly the cold man that people think he is. He's a very warm and feeling person, but he has tremendous self-control and doesn't show it to people he doesn't want to.
To win and endure, says Bud Grant, you don't have to be brilliant, just determined. When the Vikings have the football, Grant's determination is translated into ball control. Minnesota ranks 6th in total offense, but they led the league in ball control, running more plays per game and moving the ball more consistently than anyone else. Most teams establish control of the ball by running, not the Vikings. Quarterback Fran Tarkenton moves the team with passes, mixing short flips to his running backs with bombs to his wide receivers, Sammy White and Ahmad Rashad, number 28. In 1976, Tarkenton led the NFL in completions, and despite his penchant for throwing anywhere at any time, he almost never threw the ball to the wrong team. Only 8 of his 412 passes were intercepted. Tarkenton does not throw perfect spirals, but he never did. Spirals are knuckleballs, though. He has completed more passes for more yards and more touchdowns than any quarterback in history. In spite of all of his records, Tarkenton's most notable characteristic is that he never gets discouraged and rarely injured. He gives you the impression that there is no situation in football he hasn't seen or can't find some way to salvage. No quarterback is his equal when it comes to reading defenses. He can usually anticipate an oncoming blitz and send a receiver racing into the weakened secondary. While the Vikings use their receivers on a wide variety of pass routes, their running backs work a mean one-way street. Chuck Foreman, number 44, again led the Vikings in rushing with another 1,000-yard season. Along with Foreman, Minnesota used Brent McClanahan, number 33, Robert Miller, Ron Gross, and Sammy Johnson, number 48. All of them head-down, inch-by-inch fighters, Bud Grant-type athletes. Men who beat you not with flash and finesse, but with guts and determination. The rugged heights of pro football are not conquered by offense alone. The road to the summit is traveled only by those teams who can prevent touchdowns as well as score them. In 1976, the Vikings permitted the fewest points in the NFC. Their defense is never fooled and rarely gives up a long touchdown play. The secondary of Nate Wright, Bobby Bryant, Nate Allen, Paul Krause, and Jeff Wright allowed only 8 touchdown passes. It was the lowest total in the league, and only one of the touchdown passes was longer than 25 yards. In the defensive line, the old purple people eaters are not as quick as in years past, but they can still reach the quarterback. It just takes a little longer. Tackle Alan Page, number 88, is still the leader. He led the team in quarterback sacks with 19 and remains one of the only tackles in football strong enough to single-handedly defeat a double-team block. Page's exploits have tended to obscure the solid contributions of the Vikings' other tackle, Doug Sutherland, number 69. Runners who get by Sutherland and Page have the unenviable task of facing Jeff Seaman, number 50, Minnesota's middle linebacker. The Viking linebackers do not play an attacking type defense. They rarely blitz. Instead, corner linebackers Wally Hilgenberg and Matt Blair, number 59, lay back and concentrate on pass coverage. Between the 20-yard lines, the Vikings give up territory freely. But when their goal line is threatened, they are almost impossible to move. During the course of the season, Minnesota had 11 successful goal line stands inside their 10-yard line. Minnesota's crafty veterans sag and bend, but never collapse. A football team is like a little boy. Every year it changes. During the last 2 seasons, Minnesota has added 25 new young players, and behind every Viking starter is a capable replacement. Against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Bob Lee replaced Fran Tarkenton and won the game with a touchdown pass to Ahmad Rashad. When Alan Page finishes law school and hangs out his shingle, his position could be filled by James White, number 72, last season's first draft pick. While White will have to wait to play regularly, other young Vikings have already gained some valuable playing time. Men like Doug Dumler, Neil Claybo, Wes Hamilton, and Mark Mullaney, number 77. And still others like Wendland Hall and Fred McNeil, number 54. But of all Minnesota's new players, none was more exciting than Rookie of the Year Sammy White, number 85. White's youthful exuberance led to some mistakes, like doing a one-handed celebration 5 yards before the goal line. But by the season's end, he had reached the end zone with the ball 10 times, more often than any receiver in the NFC. Because of his ability to make the big play, White became the target of every hit man in the league. But he quickly proved that he had the hands and the heart to go with his speed. Beneath the sparkling surface of new young stars flows the strong tide of proven experience. Jim Marshall, number 70, has weathered 17 seasons in the rugged climate of pro football. He has started every game the Minnesota Vikings have ever played and established a record of endurance that may never be matched. He is indestructible, says Coach Grant. So apparently is Carl Eller, number 81, a veteran of 13 years. Although mellow and even-tempered most of the time, Eller once used his fist to smash a blackboard during the halftime of a game the Vikings were losing. Inspired, Minnesota rallied to win the game. So here in the Northland, the symbols of time come together. Old players and young, all pros and rookies. A fertile mixture that blossomed into another division championship in 1976 and earned the Vikings a date with the Washington Redskins in the playoffs. The late season drive that got the Redskins into the playoffs had some people calling Coach George Allen's squad a Cinderella team. But the clock struck midnight the first time Minnesota had the ball. A 41-yard dash by Brent McClanahan set up the first of 5 Minnesota touchdowns. Stu Voigt scored it on a pass from Fran Tarkenton. 5 minutes later, the Vikings increased their lead when Sammy White grabbed a deflected pass for a touchdown. The Vikings' offense was quick striking and deceptive, but it was sustained by the strong, steady play of Ron Yeri, Steve Riley, Charles Goodrum, Ed White, Mick Tingelhoff, and Stu Voigt. Their efforts opened the pathway to victory.
How bad you want it, and I believe that. We wanted it bad.
Greatest game we played. Everybody played great.
We wanted it, and we got it.
I think that this crowd is finally got it, in the sense that feeling of emotion, the sense of victory. I said today that I even saw some history made. I saw Bud Grant smile real big, and I think that's a good sign.
For the second time in 3 years, the championship of the National Conference would be decided in a game between the Los Angeles Rams and the Minnesota Vikings. Early in the first quarter, the Rams battered the smaller Vikings with a drive that carried to the Minnesota 1-yard line. A quarterback sneak by Pat Hayden on third down left the Rams 6 inches from the Minnesota goal line.
6 inches!
The fury of the Viking defense persuaded Ram coach Chuck Knox to try for a field goal instead of a touchdown.
Dempsey in to try for the field goal. This is a chip shot. There's a snap a bit high. The ball is down. The kick is blocked. It's going to be a touchdown. The Vikings are going to score. It's Bobby Bryant. At the 50 to 40, the 35 to 30, the 25 to 20 to 15 to 10 to 5. Touchdown on a blocked field goal. Nick Eller blocked it. Bobby Bryant scoops it out and goes the distance. Unbelievable.
Bryant's touchdown served as a hinge on which the game turned. In the second quarter, Fred Cox kicked a field goal. And this 62-yard run by Chuck Foreman set up another touchdown which expanded Minnesota's lead to 17-0. But the Rams are a veteran team. They have won 4 straight Western Division titles, and they do not give up easily. The Rams' defense forced 2 turnovers, and their offense converted both of them into touchdowns. The inspired Rams trailed by only 4 points, but their high hopes were dashed on the rocks of the Viking defense.
Drops back to pass. He has protection. Throw the long one over the middle. Intended for Fran. Intercepted by Bobby Bryant. Bobby Bryant with his second interception of the game. Double wing to the right side, and Francis will throw. Caught by Foreman to the 45. He's to the 50. Breaks away from 45 to 40. 35-30. 25-20. 15 out of bounds at the 11-yard line. Francis going to hand off to Sammy Johnson. He gets a hole. He's inside the 5. And he's down. Touchdown. Sammy Johnson. The Vikings are Super Bowl bound.
Somewhere there's a street of broken dreams. If you can't find it on the map, ask any Viking fan. He'll tell you it leads to the Super Bowl. The Vikings were 1 victory away from their greatest season ever. But the magic moment flickered and vanished, and the World Championship belonged to the Oakland Raiders. But as Captain Jim Marshall said, the Super Bowl is not the end of the world. If you lose, the sun will rise again. When it does, it will catch the Minnesota Vikings smiling. Because this is a team that came far in 1976. And a team that can look to the future and say, we will go farther yet.